Today we have a story about a man's grief, a community's silence, and a reckoning that came wrapped in Christmas hymns and blood. This account was discovered among the burned records of Mount Zion Baptist Church in Calhoun County, Mississippi, dated 1897. The pages were water-stained, some words lost to time, but what remains tells of events that Christmas morning when 67 souls never left the church alive. If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing and becoming part of our community. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from our amazing viewers all around the world. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're listening from and the exact time right now. We're deeply interested in knowing how far and at what times of day or night these documented stories that time tried to erase reach. The record begins with a woman named Evelyn Price, a laundress who lived in a small wooden house on the eastern edge of Calhoun County. She was 34 years old, a black woman with steady hands and a reputation for keeping her word. She took in washing from the white families in town and from the church itself. Her husband, Thomas Price, worked as a carpenter, building furniture and repairing wagon wheels. They had one son, Daniel, aged 12, who helped his mother carry baskets of clean linen through the dusty roads each Saturday. The town was small, perhaps 300 souls in total, and the church stood at its center like a great white tooth. Mount Zion Baptist Church was run by Reverend Howard Tillman, a broad man with silver hair and a voice that could shake the rafters. He was respected, feared, and obeyed. When Reverend Tillman spoke, people listened. When he gave instruction, people followed. Evelyn had known the Reverend all her life. He had baptized her as a girl, married her to Thomas, and blessed Daniel when he was born. She trusted the church as she trusted the sun to rise. Thomas was quieter than his wife, a man who measured twice and cut once, who spoke only when he had something worth saying. He built pews for the church without pay, sanded the pulpit until it gleamed, and never missed a Sunday service. His son, Daniel, was bright and obedient, a boy who carried his father's tools and his mother's smile. But there were rules at Mount Zion that no one spoke of aloud. Children were expected to sit in perfect silence during service. No fidgeting, no whispering, no movement unless called upon. Reverend Tillman said it was discipline, that it taught respect for the Lord's house. Most parents agreed, or at least said nothing against it. Evelyn noticed, though, that some children were corrected more harshly than others. She noticed that when a white child squirmed or giggled, the Reverend smiled and called it youthful spirit. When a black child did the same, the Reverend's face would harden, and he would call the child forward after service for instruction. She mentioned it once to Thomas, late at night when Daniel was asleep. "You ever notice," she whispered, "how the Reverend looks at our children?" Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Best not to notice things like that, Evelyn." But she did notice. She noticed the way the Reverend's eyes lingered on Daniel during hymns. She noticed the way he would pause beside their pew, his shadow falling long and cold across her son's small shoulders. One Sunday in early December, Daniel shifted his weight during the sermon. It was nothing, barely a movement, just a boy's leg falling asleep. But Reverend Tillman stopped mid-sentence. The church went silent. "Daniel Price," the Reverend said, his voice soft as silk, "come forward." Evelyn's heart clenched. Thomas put a hand on her knee, pressing down gently, a warning. Daniel stood and walked to the front of the church, his head bowed. The Reverend placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Discipline," he said to the congregation, "is the foundation of faith." Then he told Daniel to kneel and remain there until the service ended. 2 hours. When they finally left the church, Daniel's knees were scraped and trembling. Evelyn wanted to scream. Thomas said nothing, but his jaw was tight as iron. That night, Evelyn lay awake and listened to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the church bell ring once, though it was not the hour for ringing. She did not know why, but the sound made her afraid. The following Sunday, Reverend Tillman announced a new rule. All children between the ages of 10 and 15 would remain after service for special instruction in Scripture and obedience. It was not optional. Parents were to collect their children an hour later from the side door of the church. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. She looked at Thomas, but his face revealed nothing. When service ended, the adults filed out into the cold December air while the children stayed behind. Evelyn lingered near the door, listening. She could hear the Reverend's voice, steady and low, but could not make out the words. Then she heard the sound of wood striking wood, rhythmic and sharp. She moved closer. Through a crack in the door, she saw the children standing in a line, hands behind their backs. The Reverend walked slowly before them, holding a wooden rod about the length of a man's arm. He stopped in front of a girl named Clara, no more than 11 years old. "Recite the 23rd Psalm," he said. Clara's voice shook as she began. She stumbled over a word. The rod came down across her palms, once, twice. Evelyn gasped and stepped back. Her hand flew to her mouth. Thomas appeared beside her. "Come away," he said quietly. "Did you see?" "I saw come away." They walked home in silence. Daniel met them at the side door an hour later, his face pale, his hands red. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, kneeling before him. "We learned Scripture, Mama." "Did he hurt you?" Daniel hesitated, then he shook his head. "No, Mama, I remembered all my verses." But that night, Evelyn saw the bruises on his wrists when she helped him wash for bed. Small, finger-shaped marks, as though someone had gripped him too hard. She said nothing. Thomas said nothing. What could they say? The Reverend was the law in that church, and the church was the heart of the town. The next morning, Evelyn went to deliver clean linens to the Reverend's house, a large white structure behind the church. She knocked on the door, and the Reverend himself answered. "Mrs. Price," he said warmly, "come in, come in." She stepped inside, holding the basket of folded sheets. "I wanted to speak with you," she began carefully, "about the children's instruction." The Reverend's smile did not falter. "Ah, yes, a necessary measure, I'm afraid. So many children these days lack proper guidance at home." Evelyn felt the sting of his words but kept her voice steady. "Daniel is a good boy, Reverend. He knows his Scripture well." "Indeed he does, a credit to you and Thomas." The Reverend took the basket from her hands. "But goodness is not enough, Mrs. Price. Obedience must be absolute. The Lord demands it." "And does the Lord demand bruises?" The words left her mouth before she could stop them. The Reverend's smile vanished. For a moment the room seemed colder. "I would be very careful," he said softly, "about making accusations against a man of God. People in this town have long memories, Mrs. Price, and short patience for troublemakers." Evelyn's heart pounded, but she held his gaze. "I meant no disrespect, Reverend." "Of course you didn't." His smile returned, but it did not reach his eyes. "You're a good woman, Evelyn. Keep being good, for Daniel's sake." She left the house with her empty basket and a weight in her chest that felt like stone. That night she woke to the sound of footsteps outside their window, slow, deliberate footsteps circling the house. Thomas heard them too. He rose and looked out but saw nothing in the darkness. The footsteps stopped at their door, then faded into silence. In the morning, they found a white cloth tied to their doorknob, marked with a single red cross. No one in town would tell them what it meant. December pressed on, cold and gray. The special instruction continued every Sunday, and Daniel grew quieter with each passing week. He stopped humming while he worked. He flinched when doors opened suddenly. Evelyn watched her son disappearing into himself and felt powerless to stop it. Other parents said nothing. Some even praised the Reverend's firm hand, saying their children were better behaved, more respectful. But Evelyn saw the fear in those children's eyes, the way they walked with shoulders hunched, as though waiting for a blow. She was not alone in her worry. Ruth Coleman, a woman who worked at the general store, pulled Evelyn aside one afternoon. "I've been watching," Ruth said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "My nephew Isaiah, he comes home from that instruction with marks on his back. Says the Reverend makes them strip to the waist if they get their verses wrong." Evelyn felt sick. "Have you said anything?" Ruth shook her head. "To who? The Reverend runs this town, Evelyn. The sheriff sits in the front pew every Sunday. The mayor teaches Sunday school. Who's going to listen to us?" "Someone has to." "Maybe, but it won't be anyone in Calhoun County." That night Evelyn told Thomas what Ruth had said. He listened in silence, his hands working a piece of wood, shaving it smooth with slow, deliberate strokes. "I've been hearing things too," he said finally. "At the mill, men talk. They say the Reverend's always been this way, but it's gotten worse these past few years. They say he believes he's doing the Lord's work, purging sin from the young." "It's not the Lord's work to beat children." "I know that, you know that." Thomas set down his knife. "But the Reverend doesn't see it that way, and the people who could stop him choose not to see it at all." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "So we do nothing." "I didn't say that." He was quiet for a long moment, then stood and went to a wooden box beneath their bed. From it, he pulled a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "My father kept records," Thomas said. "Names, dates, events, things people wanted forgotten. He said that one day the truth would matter." He opened the journal and showed her page after page of careful handwriting. Incidents from years past, crimes covered up, injustices ignored, and there near the end, entries about Reverend Tillman, a girl who'd disappeared after accusing him of improper conduct, a boy who'd been beaten so badly he couldn't walk for a month, all of it buried, all of it silenced. "Your father knew," Evelyn whispered. "He knew, but he was one man and the Reverend had the whole town behind him." Thomas closed the journal. "We'll keep our own record now. Write down everything. Dates, names, what Daniel tells us. When the time comes, we'll have proof." It was a small hope, but it was hope nonetheless. The following Sunday, something changed. During the instruction, the Reverend called Daniel forward. Evelyn, waiting outside, heard her son's name and felt her blood run cold. She pressed her ear to the door. "Daniel Price," the Reverend's voice echoed. "You have been defiant in your heart. I can see it in your eyes. You think yourself above correction." "No, sir," Daniel's voice was small. "Lies compound sin, boy. Remove your shirt." Evelyn's hand went to the door handle, but Thomas caught her wrist. "Not yet," he breathed. "If you go in there now, it'll be worse for him later." "I can't." "Not yet." They stood frozen, listening to the sound of leather striking flesh. Once, twice, 3 times. Daniel did not cry out, but Evelyn heard his breathing, quick and sharp with pain. When the children were finally released, Daniel walked out with his shirt clutched in his hands, his back marked with 3 long welts. Thomas carried him home. That night Evelyn wrote in the journal by candlelight while Thomas held their sleeping son. She wrote the date, December 17th, 1897. She described the welts, the sound of the strap, the Reverend's words. When she finished, she looked at Thomas. "We're going to stop this," she said. "Yes," Thomas replied, "we are." Outside, the church bell rang 3 times, though it was well past midnight. Neither of them slept. Sunday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. The church was decorated with pine boughs and white candles. The air smelled of wax and winter. Families arrived in their best clothes, carrying hymnals and covered dishes for the Christmas meal to be shared after service. Evelyn dressed Daniel carefully, her hands gentle over the healing marks on his back. He had not spoken much in the days since the last instruction, and she saw a hardness in his eyes that had not been there before. "Stay close to us today," she told him, "no matter what." Daniel nodded. The service began with hymns. Reverend Tillman stood at the pulpit, resplendent in white robes, his arms spread wide as though embracing the congregation. "On this holy eve," he began, "we celebrate the birth of our Savior who came to cleanse the world of sin, and we, as his servants, must carry on that work. We must purge sin wherever we find it, in whatever form it takes." His eyes swept over the congregation and landed on the children sitting in the front rows. "Today," he continued, "we will have a special demonstration of faith, a reminder that discipline and devotion are one and the same." Evelyn's stomach turned. "Daniel Price," the Reverend called, "come forward." The church fell silent. Thomas's hand shot out, gripping Evelyn's arm. She looked at him, saw the warning in his eyes, but her body was already moving. "Reverend," she said, standing, every head turned toward her, "it's Christmas Eve, surely." "Sit down, Mrs. Price. He's just a boy. He is a sinner in need of correction. Sit down." The weight of the entire congregation pressed down on her. She felt their eyes, their judgment, their silent command to obey. Thomas pulled gently on her arm. "Evelyn," he whispered, "please." She sat, but her hands were shaking. Daniel walked to the front of the church, his head high. Evelyn's heart broke at the sight of him, so small before the Reverend's towering figure. "This child," Reverend Tillman said, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder, "has shown defiance in his heart. He questions authority. He harbors resentment. These sins must be driven out." He produced a leather strap, longer and thicker than the one he'd used before. "Remove your shirt, boy." Daniel hesitated. "Now." Slowly, Daniel unbuttoned his shirt and let it fall. The congregation gasped at the welt still visible on his back, but the Reverend showed no mercy. "Kneel." Daniel knelt. The Reverend raised the strap. "Stop this." Evelyn was on her feet again, her voice ringing through the church. "In the name of God, stop this." The Reverend's face twisted with fury. "Remove this woman from my church." Two deacons moved toward Evelyn, but Thomas stepped between them. "No one touches my wife," he said quietly. The church erupted in whispers. The Reverend's face turned red. "You dare defy me, in the Lord's house." "This isn't the Lord's house anymore," Thomas said. "It's yours, and you filled it with fear." The Reverend's voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the church. "You will regret this, Thomas Price, both of you." He brought the strap down on Daniel's back. "Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Daniel collapsed forward, his small body crumpling to the floor. Evelyn screamed and ran to him, Thomas right behind her. They gathered their son in their arms and carried him from the church while the congregation sat in stunned silence. Behind them, Reverend Tillman's voice rose in song, a Christmas hymn, as though nothing had happened. That night Daniel lay in bed with fever. His back was infected, the welts hot and swollen. Evelyn bathed them with cool water while Thomas paced the small room like a caged animal. "We're leaving," Thomas said. "First light, we're leaving this town." "And go where? You think this doesn't happen everywhere?" "Then I'll kill him." Evelyn looked up sharply. "Thomas." "I'll kill him, Evelyn. I swear before God I'll kill that man." She wanted to tell him no, that violence would solve nothing, that they had to be better. But when she looked at her son's broken body, she found she had no words. In the hour before dawn, Daniel's fever broke. He opened his eyes and looked at his father. "Papa," he whispered, "it hurts." "I know, son, I know." Daniel closed his eyes again. His breathing slowed. By sunrise, he was gone. Evelyn's scream could be heard 3 houses away. Thomas said nothing. He simply stood, walked to his workshop, and closed the door. He did not come out for 2 days. The burial was small. Ruth Coleman came, and a few others who'd grown weary of the Reverend's cruelty. The church sent no one. Reverend Tillman sent a note expressing his condolences and reminding them that the Lord's discipline is harsh but necessary. Evelyn burned the note. Thomas had not spoken since Daniel died. He worked in his shop from dawn until long past dark, the sound of sawing and hammering filling the cold December air. Evelyn brought him food, but he barely ate. She tried to talk to him, but he only shook his head. On the morning of December 28th, she went to the workshop and found him building something large. A frame of wood, intricate and precise, with mechanisms she didn't understand. "What is this?" she asked. Thomas looked at her with eyes that seemed empty. "Justice," he said. She felt a chill run through her. "Thomas, what are you planning?" "They killed our boy, Evelyn. They beat him in the name of God, and they killed him. The Reverend killed him, not the whole church. The whole church sat and watched. The whole church said nothing. They're all guilty." He turned back to his work. "Christmas morning, there's a special service. Everyone will be there. Every single person who sat silent while our son was murdered." Evelyn's heart stopped. "Thomas, no, you can't." "I can and I will." She grabbed his arm. "This isn't justice. It's revenge. It's murder. Call it what you want." He pulled away gently but firmly. "I've made my peace with God. I suggest you make yours. I won't let you do this." Thomas looked at her with something like pity. "Then you'd better go to the sheriff, tell him everything. Maybe he'll stop me. Maybe he'll arrest me. Or maybe he'll do what he's always done and nothing at all." Evelyn stood there, torn between love and horror. She thought of Daniel's body in the ground. She thought of the Reverend's smile. She thought of all the silent faces in that church. "What you're building," she said slowly, "what will it do?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he showed her. The device was simple but devastating. A series of chains and counterweights attached to the church's support beams. When triggered, they would pull the main supports free, collapsing the entire structure inward. Anyone inside would be crushed or trapped. The fire he would start afterward would finish the work. "They'll all burn," he said flatly, "every last one of them." Evelyn felt tears on her face. "There will be children there, Thomas, innocent children." "Our child was innocent." His voice cracked. "Our Daniel was innocent and they killed him anyway." She had no answer to that. For 2 days she wrestled with what to do. She could go to the authorities, but Thomas was right. They would do nothing. She could warn the church, but then Thomas would hang for attempted murder. She could do nothing, and 67 people would die. She thought of Ruth Coleman, who had tried to help. She thought of the other children, the ones still suffering under the Reverend's hand. She thought of Daniel. On the night of December 30th, she made her decision. She went to the workshop and found Thomas putting the final touches on his device. "I'm coming with you," she said. He looked up surprised. "Evelyn." "I'm coming with you. If this is happening, I'll be there. I won't let you die alone." Thomas's face crumpled. He held her, and for the first time since Daniel's death, he wept. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know." That night she wrote one final entry in the journal. She described Thomas's plan. She wrote the names of everyone who would be in the church. She explained why they had done nothing, why no one would help them, why this was the only way Thomas could see. Then she wrote, "God forgive us both." She sealed the journal and hid it beneath a loose floorboard in their house. On Christmas Eve morning, Thomas and Evelyn walked to the church before dawn. He carried his tools in a canvas sack. She carried a lantern. The church was empty, silent, waiting for the celebration to come. Thomas worked quickly, installing the chains and counterweights in the shadows of the rafters. Evelyn stood watch, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. When he finished, they stood together in the center of the church, looking up at the pulpit where their son had been beaten. "Are you certain?" Evelyn asked one last time. Thomas looked at her. "No," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." They left the church as the sun rose. painting the sky the color of blood. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. The town woke to the smell of pine and wood smoke, to the sound of church bells calling the faithful to service. Families dressed in their finest clothes, carrying wrapped gifts and baskets of food. Children ran ahead, excited for the special Christmas celebration. Evelyn and Thomas stood in their small house, watching through the window as people streamed toward the church. Ruth Coleman passed by with her nephew. The sheriff walked with his wife and 3 daughters. The mayor carried his youngest son on his shoulders. Evelyn felt her resolve waver. "Thomas, there's still time." "No," his voice was stone, "there isn't." They waited until the church bells stopped ringing, until the doors closed and the final hymn began. Then Thomas picked up a small wooden box from the table. Inside was a length of fuse cord and a sulfur match. "You don't have to come," he said to Evelyn. "Yes," she said, "I do." They walked to the church together, moving through the quiet streets like ghosts. When they reached the side door, Thomas produced a key. He'd built the lock himself years ago and had never surrendered the spare. They entered in silence. Inside, the church was full. Every pew was packed with families singing, "O come, all ye faithful." Candles burned on every surface, their light warm and golden. Reverend Tillman stood at the pulpit, his arms raised, his voice soaring above the congregation. He did not see Thomas and Evelyn slip into the back room, where the mechanism was hidden. Thomas knelt and began connecting the fuse to the trigger. His hands were steady, his face calm. Evelyn watched him work and thought of Daniel, of his smile, of the way he used to hum while helping her fold laundry. "I love you," she whispered. Thomas looked up at her. "I love you too, always." He struck the match. The fuse began to burn, a slow sizzle of sparks creeping toward the mechanism. They had perhaps 5 minutes before it triggered. Thomas took Evelyn's hand. "We should go." But Evelyn didn't move. She was looking through the crack in the door, at all those faces singing, at all those children in their Sunday clothes. And she saw something Thomas had not. In the second row, sitting very still, was a little girl about Daniel's age. She had bruises on her arms. Her eyes were fixed on the Reverend with a look of pure terror. Evelyn knew that look. She'd seen it in her son's eyes. "Thomas," she said quietly, "look." He looked. The little girl shifted, and the Reverend's eyes snapped to her. His hand moved in a sharp gesture, "Stay still," and the child froze. Thomas's face went pale. He looked at the burning fuse, then back at the child, then at all the other children scattered throughout the congregation. At least 20 of them, all young, all afraid. "Oh God," he whispered, "what have I done?" Evelyn grabbed his arm. "Put it out, Thomas, put it out." He lunged for the fuse, but it was burning faster than he'd calculated. He tried to smother it with his hand, but the sparks just jumped past his fingers. It was reaching the mechanism. "Everyone out," Evelyn screamed, throwing open the door. "Get out, the church is going to collapse." The singing stopped, heads turned. For a moment no one moved. Then the first chain released with a sound like a gunshot. The church groaned, dust fell from the rafters, someone screamed. Reverend Tillman's voice boomed out. "Stay calm, stay in your seats, this is a test of faith." But Thomas was running down the aisle now, shouting, "It's not a test, the supports are failing, everyone get out now." The second chain released, a beam cracked, the congregation erupted into chaos. People ran for the doors, shoving and stumbling. Parents grabbed their children. The elderly were trampled. Reverend Tillman tried to maintain order, but his voice was lost in the screaming. Evelyn ran to the little girl and pulled her from her pew. "Come on, baby, come on." Thomas was trying to free people trapped beneath a fallen beam. He was shouting for others to help, but most were too panicked to hear. The third chain released. The roof began to cave in. Timber and plaster rained down. A support beam crashed into the center aisle, blocking the main exit. Fire broke out from overturned candles, spreading fast across the dry pine boughs. Evelyn dragged the little girl toward the side door, the same one she and Thomas had used. Behind her, she could hear screaming, could smell smoke and blood. She made it outside and pushed the child away from the building. "Run! Get away from here!" Then she turned back. Thomas was still inside. She fought her way back through the smoke and found him pinned beneath a fallen rafter, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. "Go," he shouted when he saw her. "Evelyn, go." "Not without you." She tried to lift the beam, but it was too heavy. Fire was closing in from both sides. The heat was unbearable. Thomas grabbed her hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to tell them," he gasped. "Tell them it was me, only me, you didn't know." "Thomas." The roof collapsed with a roar like thunder. When the dust settled, Mount Zion Baptist Church was a smoking ruin. The walls had collapsed inward, leaving only the stone foundation and twisted wooden bones. Fire still burned in pockets, sending black smoke into the Christmas sky. Survivors stumbled away from the wreckage, coughing and bleeding. Some helped pull others from the rubble. Some just sat on the ground and stared. The sheriff arrived, then the mayor, then half the county. They organized rescue efforts, pulling bodies from the debris. By nightfall, they had counted 67 dead, including Reverend Howard Tillman, whose body was found beneath the pulpit, still clutching his Bible. Thomas Price was found near the center of the collapse, crushed beneath a support beam. Evelyn Price was found beside him, her hand in his. But Evelyn was still breathing. They carried her to the doctor's house, where he worked for 3 hours to save her life. She had broken ribs, a fractured arm, severe burns, and smoke damage to her lungs. She should have died, but she didn't. For 2 days, she drifted in and out of consciousness. When she finally woke, the sheriff was sitting beside her bed. "Mrs. Price," he said gently, "I need you to tell me what happened." Evelyn looked at him. She thought about the journal hidden beneath her floorboards. She thought about Thomas's last words. She thought about Daniel. "It was an accident," she whispered. "An accident?" The sheriff frowned. "Mrs. Price, the structure didn't just fail. Someone tampered with the supports." "My husband." The words came hard, but she forced them out. "Thomas was angry about what happened to our son. He was out of his mind with grief. He did something terrible, and I didn't know until it was too late." It was not entirely a lie, but it was not entirely the truth either. The sheriff studied her face. "You're saying Thomas Price deliberately collapsed the church?" "Yes," Evelyn closed her eyes. "I tried to stop him. I tried to warn everyone, but I was too late." "Why would he do such a thing?" Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at the sheriff with all the pain and rage she'd been carrying. "Because Reverend Tillman beat our son to death, and no one did anything to stop it. Because this town chose to protect a monster instead of protecting our children." The room went quiet. "That's a serious accusation," the sheriff said finally. "It's the truth. You want proof. There's a journal hidden in our house under the floorboards in the bedroom. My husband's father kept records. We added to them. Everything's in there. Names, dates, everything the Reverend did to those children." The sheriff left and returned 3 hours later with the journal. He sat up all night reading it by lamplight. When dawn came, his face was gray. Evelyn watched him from her bed. "Are you going to arrest me?" "For what? You tried to save them." "I knew what Thomas was planning. I could have stopped him." The sheriff was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I sat in that church every Sunday. I saw those children. I heard the sounds from the back room after service. I told myself it was discipline, that it wasn't my place to interfere." He looked at her. "I failed your boy, Mrs. Price. We all did." "So what happens now?" "Now," the sheriff stood. "Now I've got to tell this town that their beloved reverend was a sadist who tortured children. I've got to tell them that Thomas Price was driven to murder by their silence. And I've got to live with the fact that 67 people are dead because I was too much of a coward to act when it mattered. He walked to the door, then paused. The official report will say it was a structural failure, an old building, too much weight, a tragic accident. Thomas's role will be noted but not publicized. He's dead, so there's no one to punish. And I expect most folks would rather forget the whole thing anyway. And the children he hurt, Evelyn asked, the ones who are still alive. The sheriff's jaw tightened. They'll be protected now. I'll see to it personally. After he left, Evelyn lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about justice and vengeance, about faith and punishment, about how thin the line between them really was. She had gone into that church to die beside her husband. She had been ready to burn with him for what they'd done. But God, it seemed, had other plans. 2 weeks later, when Evelyn was strong enough to walk, she returned to the ruins of the church. Most of the rubble had been cleared away, but the foundation remained, blackened and broken. She stood where the pulpit had been and spoke aloud to the empty air. "Daniel," she said, "I hope you can forgive us. Forgive your father for what he did. Forgive me for not stopping him. We loved you so much, baby. We loved you so much that it drove us to something unforgivable." The wind moved through the ruins, carrying the smell of ash and char. "But maybe," she whispered, "maybe some good will come of it. Maybe the children who are left will be safer now. Maybe people will finally open their eyes." She stood there until the sun set, until the ruins were swallowed in shadow. Then she walked home alone. The months that followed were like walking through fog. Evelyn healed slowly, her body mending faster than her spirit. The town rebuilt, but not the church. The land where Mount Zion had stood was left empty, a silent reminder of what had happened that Christmas morning. Some families left Calhoun County, unable to bear the weight of memory. Others stayed but never spoke of it, as though silence could erase the horror. The children who survived grew up marked by what they'd seen, by what they'd endured before and after. Ruth Coleman came to visit Evelyn often. She brought food, sat in silence, held Evelyn's hand when the nightmares came. "Do you hate me?" Evelyn asked her one day. Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what I feel," she said honestly. "My nephew survived because you screamed for everyone to run, but my sister died in the collapse. So do I thank you or curse you?" "You should curse me." "Maybe, but I also read that journal. I saw what that man did to our children year after year while we all looked away." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Maybe we all got what we deserved." "The children didn't deserve it." "No, they didn't." In the spring of 1898, a new church was built on the other side of town, a Methodist church, led by a young minister from Georgia who preached forgiveness and healing. Some of the old congregation attended. Others never set foot in a church again. Evelyn went once to see if she could still pray. She sat in the back pew and listened to the sermon about mercy and grace. But when she closed her eyes, all she saw was Daniel's face, Thomas's hands, fire and falling timber. She never went back. Instead, she found peace in smaller things. She tended a garden behind her house, growing vegetables and flowers. She took in sewing work, her hands moving through fabric the way Thomas's hands had moved through wood. She taught herself to read better, using the journal and later, books Ruth brought her. And she wrote. She wrote everything she remembered, everything that had led to that terrible morning. She wrote about the Reverend's cruelty, about the town's complicity, about Thomas's grief and rage, about her own guilt and sorrow. She wrote it all down so that someday, someone might understand. Years passed. Evelyn grew older, her hair turning gray, her hands becoming gnarled with arthritis. She never remarried. She never had another child. She lived quietly, a ghost in the town that had forgotten her. In 1912, she received a letter from a lawyer in Jackson. The state was conducting an investigation into historical abuses in religious institutions. They had heard rumors about Mount Zion and wanted her testimony. Evelyn was 63 years old by then. She traveled to Jackson and told her story to a room full of officials. She brought the journal, the records, the evidence of what had happened. They listened, they took notes, they thanked her for her courage. Nothing came of it. She returned to Calhoun County and never spoke of it again. In 1923, Evelyn Price died in her sleep. She was 74 years old. She was buried beside Daniel and Thomas in the small cemetery at the edge of town. Her house was sold, her belongings dispersed. The journal was found by the new owner and donated to the County Historical Society, where it sat forgotten for decades. Until now. From the recovered pages. Let it be known that on the 25th day of December, 1897, 67 souls perished in the collapse of Mount Zion Baptist Church. The official cause was listed as structural failure, but the truth, written here in my hand, is darker. My husband Thomas Price, maddened by grief over the death of our son Daniel, sabotaged the church's supports. I knew of his plan and did not stop him. I am as guilty as he. But I also know this. The man who killed my son stood in that pulpit every Sunday and called himself a servant of God. The people who sat silent while our boy was beaten called themselves righteous. The town that did nothing to protect the innocent called itself Christian. We were all guilty long before that Christmas morning. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not expect mercy. I only ask that whoever reads these words remember this. There are cruelties that cannot be borne, injustices that poison the soul, and sometimes the weight of silence is heavier than any crime. God have mercy on us all. Evelyn Price, January 1898. The journal now rests in the Calhoun County Historical Society, available for viewing by appointment only. The land where Mount Zion Baptist Church stood remains empty. Local children say it's haunted, that on Christmas morning you can still hear the sound of church bells ringing, though no bells remain. Make of that what you will. This concludes the account of the Mount Zion tragedy. If this story has affected you, we encourage you to speak up against injustice wherever you see it. Silence, as Evelyn Price learned, is its own kind of violence. Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. And never forget, the stories we bury don't stay buried forever. Some truths refuse to die.